Last week, Donald Trump landed in Beijing, walking off the plane with a heavyweight delegation, including Elon Musk, Tim Cook, and other tech and finance bosses. It was an image that showed just how closely US power now sits alongside Silicon Valley. It echoed a question the journalist Carole Cadwalladr has been asking: where does government end and big tech begin? Cadwalladr uncovered the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal for The Guardian back in 2018 and later fought off a long legal case brought by a key figure linked to Brexit. She now runs The Nerve, an independent news outlet, and writes a Substack called How to Survive the Broligarchy. And she makes a direct argument that the line between the state, the platforms, and the press has been deliberately blurred. And the image from Beijing, the president and his billionaires side by side, is the system and not an anomaly.
What it says to me is that we now have this merger between what is an increasingly authoritarian government in the US, Donald Trump, and this merger with the Silicon Valley tech platforms. And that is now totally explicit. And it means that these social media platforms that we spend our time on and share photos and communicate with our friends, we're now part of that authoritarian state apparatus. Those two things are now one and the same. And, you know, my view is that we've got to really start changing the framing of the way that we understand these technology platforms, because they are not our friends. Their entire business model is surveillance. They are trying to amass as much information, as much personal data on us as possible in order to sell us stuff. But now that same massive amounts of data is, as I say, part of this US state operation. And so the ways that our personal information could be used as part of Trump's MAGA plan or other authoritarians around the world is, I think, extremely, extremely alarming. And we're already seeing the results of that play out in the US.
And in the US, we see that a lot of this revolves around this group of individuals, wealthy individuals. You've coined the term broligarchy. What exactly is that?
So the broligarchy is a word that I coined that's brought together the idea of tech bros being the new oligarchs, these rich businessmen who know that they have to keep on the right side of state power, of the autocrat in position. And that's what I mean by broligarchy. These tech dudes, they're enormously rich, they're enormously powerful, but they also see how by aligning themselves with Trump, that's the way that they're going to become even richer.
And who are these key figures?
So the key figures are people you saw at Donald Trump's inauguration. So Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Tim Cook, and there was one person who wasn't there who is interesting, and that is Peter Thiel.
Right, one of those broligarchs, as you mentioned, Peter Thiel. You've described him as one of the most dangerous men in the world. Why is that?
So Peter Thiel is a really singular character, even amongst the other tech bro overlords. He's very strategic and he's very influential, and he really thinks long term, and he places these long-term bets. So when Silicon Valley was still supposedly progressive and voting Democrat in 2016, he was the first tech dude to come out in favour of Trump. He owns this surveillance defence tech company, Palantir. It's embedded in the US military. It's being used in its operations, its military operations in Iran. But it's also become a really critical part of our national infrastructure in Britain. It has contracts across the entire UK government. It runs the platform that handles all of our health data. Peter Thiel and the CEO, Alex Karp, they talk about how we are here to defend the West and we will do whatever it takes for America to win. And at the same time, they're scooping up these other government contracts around the world, which, like, there's a lot of questions about that.
And people like Peter Thiel, you talk about the others as well. I'm just wondering what it is that they have found that appeals to them in Trump 2.0 in particular that they weren't able to get under previous governments.
I mean, it's just they're getting everything they want. So their worst nightmare is any kind of regulation over what they can do with their companies, the lengths that they can go to, any kind of restrictions on access to data, any restrictions on their monopoly power. And with Trump, he's a pay-to-play man. You know, his election campaign was funded by these guys, and particularly actually by the crypto bros as well. They've got this guy in office who will let them do whatever they want in order to grow their companies. And that's why they love Trump, and that's why they hate the European Union. The European Union is their worst nightmare because the European Union is trying to regulate these companies and they hate it, and they're trying all sorts of ways to bully the EU and get their own way here too.
It's clear there's been a problem with accountability because it's not just in AI, it's even in a story you uncovered, which is the sort of Facebook Cambridge Analytica issue, which had to do with public data being taken without permission and being used for their own benefit. I'm just wondering where that accountability should have or should be coming from.
Well, there is no accountability. We've had no accountability of the tech platforms. We see glimmers in the States through the courts. There has been a couple of important victories. And in the EU, we have seen legislation, but we haven't yet seen if it's actually going to work, if they are going to be able to impose limits on these companies. The philosophy of Silicon Valley has been move fast, break things, get away with it for as long as you can. That's their business model. Their business model is to break the law. And everything that happened with social media, we now see repeating itself with AI. And because they got away with it once, they're getting away with it again. They've stolen this data. They've stolen this IP from journalists and writers and artists and musicians, and you know, they're trying to create value off the back of that stolen work. And it's because, you know, nobody has managed to find a way to stop them.
Would you say that is linked to why they are getting so involved in, for example, taking over media and buying up media companies and trying to reform them?
Yeah, because they really hate scrutiny. They hate journalists poking into their affairs. They hate reporters. They hate it when the narrative doesn't go their way. So they are taking over media companies. You know, we've seen one of the most famous news organizations in the US, the Washington Post. It's been hollowed out by Jeff Bezos. It's a tragedy what's happened to that newspaper. We see it as well. CBS is another incredibly important US network that's been taken over by another bro. So it's the family of Larry Ellison, who's less well known, but is extremely, I think he's the second richest man in the world. He owns this company called Oracle. He's taken over CBS and they've sacked a whole load of journalists. They've sort of imposed this very political kind of regimen there. And now they're looking to close the deal on Warner Brothers. And that means they're also going to get their hands on CNN and HBO. So, and this has all happened. It's less than a year. It's a year, only just over a year since Trump has come to office. And yet he's already, his allies have already scooped up and taken control of some of the most important news outlets in the country. It's kind of frankly unbelievable that it's happened so fast. But I think it's like people still don't understand what's at stake. They don't understand the scale of the problem, and they don't understand the speed at which I think these companies, these guys have really taken over the reins of power, and they really are still not getting anywhere near the kind of scrutiny they deserve.
I wonder if that also has to do with what Steve Bannon, sort of the Trump man, spoke about, which is the flooding the zone, where you just have so much information, so many scandals, so much going on, that actually the scrutiny cannot take place.
It's so difficult at the moment. We're all so completely overwhelmed. There is so much news happening. Trump is a one-man chaos machine, and that's part of how it's part of his means of kind of taking and holding on to power. You know, we're freaked out about Greenland, and then we're freaked out about the Epstein files, and then we're freaked out about Iran, and then we're freaked out about Lebanon. It's just everything's happening all at once, and the collapse. You know, part of this, again, it comes back to the technology, the collapse of our news and information systems, the collapse of trust in institutions, the lack of any kind of consensus. We're all seeing completely different realities. This is all so fundamental into, you know, what is happening in our world and why these very dangerous populists, these anti-democrats are being so successful. And increasingly, we are all, accelerating towards what feels like I call a techno-Fascist future. And so we're already, I think it's this thing which is that we're already living inside this architecture of surveillance. That data is already being centralised. It's already controlled by these companies who have stated their allegiance to Donald Trump. We can see how the far right, if they came to power in Britain, have said that they would use that same data to go after, what they call illegal immigrants and what we would say are legitimate asylum seekers. So I think the thing is, everybody, all these guys, all these authoritarians, they just copy each other. So, something's tried in one country and it spreads very quickly to another. And like I say, I find, the sort of normalization, the lack of a sort of this real sense of jeopardy about what could be coming for us, alarming.
I'm just wondering what people can do, especially considering how dependent we are on these platforms and on these giants of tech and business.
I mean, I think nothing is inevitable. So we all have agency, and we don't have to accept that there is this authoritarian takeover. The people of Hungary have showed us a way to resist and fight back. And I think from the tech point of view, I would suggest that people should become much more circumspect about the ways that they share information on these platforms. I'm personally amazed that parents put photos of their children across these social media platforms. These children haven't given their consent, and their facial, profiles are being harvested. Don't know how those could be used in the future. So I do think being sort of mindful about one's privacy is a key protective element that anybody can undertake.
I suppose one of the issues you hear about is people saying, what does it matter if my data is out there and all of that. I'm just sort of wondering whether the public is aware of the risk.
No, I don't think so. I mean, it was interesting. We're shooting this in Berlin, and it's always felt to me that people in Germany, because they have more of a sense of history, they understand how collecting information on people and how that can be weaponized and used so incredibly dangerously. We saw that. The Nazis were using IBM computer cards. The Stasi, of course, collected information on vast numbers of citizens across the country. What any of these Silicon Valley companies are doing it makes the Stasi pale in comparison. They have vastly more amounts of information and data on every single person, regardless of even if they use their platforms or not. So I think if you think about it in that context and the way that that data could be used, could be weaponized against people, and I do feel that perhaps here in Europe, in Germany perhaps in particular, there is a little bit more awareness and understanding of where this could lead.
And I suppose that's what's happened with AI and the building of these data sets, using information, using property, let's say intellectual property that they've been able to get around. How big a concern is that? How big an issue is that?
Well, there's lots of smarter, cleverer people than me who believe that the entire AI phenomenon we're seeing is a huge and precarious bubble that risks collapsing the entire global economy. What they're doing is they're throwing everything at the idea that these large language models are somehow magically going to become intelligence, that we're going to achieve AGI through chucking huge amounts of stolen data, huge amounts of computing power, huge amounts of energy, huge amounts of water, and hope that somehow they're going to get better. Vast amounts of capital are going into this project that shows no sign that it's ever going to turn a profit and shows no sign that it is going to be this marvelous, all-knowing super intelligence that's going to either save the world or destroy it, depending upon who you talk to. I mean, AI, the thing about generative AI is it looks really plausible, but it's actually, it makes so many mistakes. It hallucinates stuff. It reduces everything to this mush. You know, it takes away everything which is special and amazing about human creativity and expression. So, but people, you know, are leaning towards it because it feels like a shortcut. But there's all these studies that show, you know, students who are using AI to write their papers, they don't retain any of it afterwards. It's like, it's the opposite to learning. And I think, you know, just remember, it's using vast amounts of electricity, vast amounts of water, and it's all based upon stolen work. If you're using one of these image generators, that's because those images are based upon illegally harvested works of art and creativity with no recourse or recompense to the creators. And do we want to live in that world where we're not going to have original music and original art and original writing? You know, is that the world that we want to live in? And personally, it's not the world that I want to live in. And I think that we will miss these things when they're gone.
Have you seen anything that gives you hope that there can be mitigation and there can be a positive way forward?
I have set up a new news outlet called The Nerve. We're at thenerve.news, and we're 5 journalists who left The Guardian, all women, and we decided we wanted to do it differently. And so we set up our own micro news organisation 6 months ago with a total determination to be completely independent and to be funded by our readers and to do kick-ass investigations. And we've done that. So one of the things we've been doing is we've been really going after Palantir, for example. We've been exposing the huge number of contracts it has, £670 million worth of contracts with the UK government. We've been exposing the revolving door between government and the company. We've been exposing how we've had insiders, whistleblowers from the Ministry of Defence saying that we essentially have no national security whilst that company is inside. Little by little, there's the crumbs of scrutiny that we can bring, that other journalists can bring, that politicians can bring. And actually, it's people themselves. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of people in the UK have signed petitions, have protested. It's becoming a movement. So I do think that there are ways and means that we can fight back.
Carole Cadwalladr, thank you very much for speaking to DW.